Welcome everybody. Happy Monday. I hope you all had a good weekend. We had some good basketball games. We had Phil Mickelson winning the PGA Championship. I hope it was as nice as it was out here outside, and maybe some of you guys got outside. It's been beautiful here lately. So excited to be back here on a Monday. We've got a 6-game baseball slate here tonight. We've got a 2-game NBA playoff slate. We've still got some hockey going on, I think. A few questions already started to pop up in Slack channel. So I am going to go ahead and jump right in. I realized I can make it a little bit easier to read these questions here. Let me see if this works. Oh, all right. That made a bunch of comments there, but maybe hopefully this makes it a little bit easier to follow along. So this question came in last week from Shiver Me Ginger in our Slack channel. Question was, say you build single entry lineup, 3 max lineups, 20 max lineups, all different settings, lineups, etc. You're filling entries according to your contest types, and then you want to late swap. And the question here is, what min and max and build settings will the late swap use? For example, in single entry, I have Ian Anderson locked in today, but not in 3 max or 20 max, but have min 50%. Will late swap use lock or min 50%? And then a little bit of a follow-up here, i.e. Which build tab will it use? So I went ahead and let me pull up my screen here. All right, cool. So I am going to kind of walk through this here with an example using tonight's slate instead. It is a interesting question about the way the entry editor works here. So I've got a handful of entries for tonight's baseball slate. I went ahead and ran some builds ahead of time here just to demonstrate how this all works. So really the question is when I'm looking at my entry editor tab and it's halfway through the slate or something like that, where are my minimum and maximum exposures here coming from? And the answer is actually relatively simple. Even if you have multiple different builds and you've filled your lineups with a bunch of different builds, we are going to populate the fields for the minimum and maximum exposures here simply in the last build that you looked at or edited, and set exposures there. So we can see here, let me actually go over to this build. So what I essentially did is I built 7 lineups that are supposed to be all of my single entry and 3 entry max lineups. I set there should be some minimum exposures set here. Let's see. Yep. So I said, let's just say, for example, I had decided I wanted to lock in Woodruff and Montas. So I was playing them in all of my single entry lineups. If we go over here, and then come back, you're going to see now all of a sudden the minimum exposure for those 2 pitchers has been set at 100. And then if we look over at our 30 max lineups or our 30 entry lineups here, I've got a bunch of different exposures. I think I capped some pitchers. Just a second here. Yeah, so you can see on this side, I capped a couple pitchers. In this case, I actually capped Montas at 10. And I've also got some batter exposures. And if we go back over here to the entry tab, you're going to see now those minimum and maximum exposures are changing there. We wanted to make this, so here they are. So you can see some of these exposures are set. We wanted to make this as useful as possible without being disruptive because of how tight on time sometimes late swap is. And if you've got contradictory exposure settings across multiple builds like I do here with Montas, the last thing we want to start happening is to have contradictions in the build logic when you're trying to update your lineups because someone got scratched at the last second and end up with an error or something like that. So that is kind of the way this has been architected so far. We want to continue to improve and get better with the way that we're handling some of these exposures. But that is the way it works right now. So these exposure rules get populated from the last build that you were viewing when you went into the entry editor. A few notes on that real quick while we are here. So I will say first of all, when we actually run a late swap build here, say this slate was in progress and we are running a build, and I have, in this case, 37 lineups. In my initial builds, we were building hundreds of lineups so that you could set those different exposures, change them around, and without having to run additional builds. We've talked about that a lot before here. When we are running a late swap build, we are just going to build the exact amount of lineups that we actually need. So in this case, 37 lineups. And in the interest of doing that in a timely manner and an efficient manner, we sometimes will have to exceed or miss some of these exposure minimum and maximum values at times. We're basically going to stay as close to these as possible, but especially if you have a lot of exposure. So you see in this case, we've got a lot of different exposure settings. We have some minimums, we have some maximums. Just in the interest of running that build quickly for users, we may sacrifice some of those minimum and maximum exposures there. I would say also to consider, if you have gone through and diligently set your exposures for a bunch of different build types and contests and news breaks, to ask yourself if it is something that necessarily needs to use the full late swap or if it's something that maybe could use the quick swap tool. So just a reminder here, when we click quick swap, there's a few different ways we can use this. We can tell the builder to just replace all out players with the best available player. I'm not going to click apply and download right now because it's not going to do anything. Alternatively, we can pick a specific player and replace them with another specific player or the best available. I see a few users have noted this recently. We have this issue where these pop-ups are showing up behind the window. So I just wanted to let everyone know we are working on that. You can see here it's dark, but this pop-up isn't very useful right now. But anyway, if you've gone through and set exposures diligently across a bunch of different contest types, and then say a certain batter or something like that gets scratched, sometimes it can be better to match your existing exposures and just go ahead and do a quick swap, a single one-to-one player. In something like basketball, where one player getting ruled out dramatically affects the entire context of that team, everyone's projections are going to change pretty dramatically. Can definitely understand why you may want to may need to do a full late swap if any news breaks or anything like that. In that particular case, I would edit your exposures in a build where you have most of your information. So say like this, we have exposure set here a lot, and then just make your changes directly on the entry editor. So let's say again, this is baseball, jumping back and forth a little bit, but let's say we have to late swap here and we want to make a couple tweaks. I would view the build you want to use as a general baseline and then go ahead and make your tweaks. So maybe some news changes that makes us feel a little bit less certain about Kikuchi, and we want to take away his min exposure and let it go. And maybe all of a sudden we want to bump up Woodruff a little bit. We can edit directly in this page here and late swap from there. And again, it's just going to end up running one late swap build for all of our lineups. This says one right now because I actually just have a placeholder in all of these lineups. I haven't actually gone through and added lineups in here yet. But hopefully that is helpful. So Shiver Me Ginger, if you are watching along now, let me know if that is helpful. If you watch this later, feel free to pop back into the chat and let me know if you have any questions, and we can go from there. Cool. Let's see here. I am going to keep us moving along. So another question that came in through our Slack channel here. Will SaberSim be supporting SuperDraft lines anytime soon? The soft answer there is a soft yes. We plan on adding SuperDraft support at some point. I don't have a firm estimate time when that would be ready. We have a pretty firm kind of defined roadmap of features we want to get to before the start of football season. Adding SuperDraft is most likely not included in that list of features that we want to bring to the product. But we do get this kind of question a lot with SuperDraft and some of these other auxiliary sites, also other sports. I've heard a lot about soccer, NASCAR projections, a little bit about WNBA and Yahoo single game contests. We've been hearing a lot about all of those things. They are on our radar. We're always hoping to bring more sites, sports, game types to users. So, but I think I would say probably not any in the idea of anytime soon, probably not before the start of football, unfortunately. But let's keep it going here. Smush said, who are the winning NBA plays for tonight? I will instead give you the winning lottery numbers for tonight. If you want to grab a pencil, 14, 42, 56, 8, 17, and 19. So as your free winning lottery ticket. Let's see. We've got another question here in Slack. This question is, best way to approach FanDuel basketball tourney, game stack or pick best value at each position. Let's go ahead and open this up here. So this is an interesting question here. I don't think there's a best way in terms of, I'm just going to assume that we're talking about like a super small slate like tonight, where we have a 2-game slate and maybe just general strategy to super small NBA slates. I don't think there's necessarily one best way to go about constructing lineups in terms of, do I want to game stack one of these games or do I want to just pick the best value opportunities? I think if we ran our builder here, we're probably going to see, I mean, there's only 2 games, so a lot of lineups are going to look like game stacks. I would say on a slate like this, especially as you are starting to look at bigger contests, one of the most important things you can do here is make sure that you are differentiating from the field. At a 2-game slate on the big contest, there are going to be certain lineups that are going to be duplicated dozens of times, maybe even 100 times for an extremely chalky lineup. So our biggest concern here is going to be making sure that we're not duplicated, because as we mentioned last week, the more duplicated your lineup is, the lower its potential ceiling is for that contest. So your expected value on well-constructed lineups drops the more they are duplicated. So that would be probably my biggest concern and the biggest thing I'm thinking about, at least initially, on a 2-game slate like this tonight. So in that regard, what are some things we can do to avoid duplication? If we open up the builder here, and let's assume that we're playing a fairly big 20 max contest or something like that. I know FanDuel doesn't have as many 20 max contests, but even if we do 150, whatever, sliders are going to be about the same. So, I mean, a few things to note right off the bat. We are going to have a very high ownership fade, or a high ownership fade, because we want to get away from some of those higher owned plays. We're going to have an extremely high smart diversity. There's so few players on the slate. We want to pick from a very limited amount of simulations when projecting these players and building the lineups. We want to capture the maximum amount of upside that we can for these lineups. But let's look at some of these other settings here, because I think typically sometimes these get forgotten, and there are definitely some ways to differentiate, especially in a large contest on a small slate like this, with some of these other settings. So first off, max salary. We had touched on this a little bit last week, talking about duplication, that there can be some advantage to dropping this down even just to 100 less on a slate like this. I think that is still valuable. I would say when it's just a 2-game slate, if you know you're playing a really big contest, especially one that's really top heavy, you might even consider dropping this down a little bit further to something like 59.5. I wouldn't talk you out of doing something like 59,000 either, just so you can say that, you know what, I'm going to just take the leverage I get from lineups that maybe have slightly less median projection and build lineups with a lower salary. The reasoning here, the strategy of what we're really trying to do is lineups are disproportionately, especially on a slate like this, built using the maximum amount of salary or very high amounts of salary compared to the win percentage of those lineups. So lineups that are built under 59.5, for example, still have a pretty strong chance of winning. That's why we have 57,000 as the minimum salary set here, because these lineups built in this range actually still have a fairly strong chance of winning compared to how often they're built. So I would definitely explore popping this max salary down a little bit on a contest like this or on a slate like this to get away from that duplication. Another setting you can look at is the minimum projection setting. So really there are only how many? A handful, 20, how many players are on the slate in total here? Probably like 40-ish. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 35-ish players total. We typically set this minimum projection at 15. I think that's our standard for basketball. But if you look on a slate like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 players are going to be crossed off that list by doing that of a pool of 35 players or so. That's almost a quarter of the players available. That does not mean you need to go and dig up super low owned projected players that are going to be projected for nothing. But there is some reason to maybe say you want to allow a little bit of some of these players back into the pool just to take some dart throws on and make your lineups a little bit different. Players like I actually saw a second ago, Marcus Howard is one that popped to me. I'm a Nuggets fan. I watched that whole game. Fortunately, Portland looked pretty good in game 1. But if you watched it, Marcus Howard was chucking it, and he looked pretty good, actually. He has a pretty nice shooting stroke. I haven't watched too much of him play, but he kind of struck me as a guy that if he's going to go out there and shoot, if by chance he gets 25 to 30 minutes tonight, he's someone that could actually rack up a lot of points. So I might want someone like this at 14 points projected, at least in my pool. I at least want the builder to consider those lineups. So I might be looking at doing something. He's at 14 points. Maybe we just drop this down to 12 and look at doing something like that. So let's just see. This is, again, 20 max. See what we get out of this. We've dropped the maximum salary down 500. We've allowed ourselves to get some lower owned plays, and we can just see what the builder's getting out of this. So give this just a second here to build. Oh, it's kind of weird. I wonder if I had a rule set or something here that I didn't notice. Huh. I'm going to do a hard refresh here and see. I wonder if I had a rule or an exposure or something set there that goofed that up. It looks like the build went. Okay, it seems like it went through. All I did there is a hard refresh. I know if you've ever reached out to us on support in Slack or seen something weird like that, a lot of times you'll hear first thing to try is a hard refresh. It's because it works. So yeah, we're looking at this here. Let's just see. So we are getting at, we actually got a ton of Marcus Howard, pretty surprisingly. And we're actually, at least right now, projecting him to be pretty highly owned. But you can see we did get some access to some of these lower projected plays. Dwayne Dedman is a guy that has a really high points per minute when he's out on the floor. So a guy that maybe taking a shot on one lineup, maybe Bam gets in foul trouble or something like that, and he ends up playing 25 minutes, could be somebody that doubles his projection potentially. We've got some access to some of these lower owned plays. So just one way to do it. Again, also none of these lineups are going to be built at maximum salary, so we're going to be a little bit different there. And it's just going to be a construction that's less likely to be duplicated. So anyway, I won't talk too much longer about that, but that is basically the number one thing I'm thinking about in terms of approaching basketball small game tournaments. I'm a little less focused on saying, I guess let's go back to this 1 second here. Like every lineup is going to be stacked, right? There's just not a lot of games. Every lineup in some way is going to look like a bit of a game stack, like we see here, right? This is McCollum, Dame, and then we've got 4 Denver players. Yeah, I guess you are essentially stacking that game, but I don't think it's necessarily counting on a certain game outcome. I would worry less about this and more about making sure that your lineups are constructed in a way that differentiates them from the field. So cool. Let's see. K9 Bronco, if you are watching this now, let me know if that was helpful. If you have any other questions, just let me know. All right. Cool. Let's see. That is all the questions we had asked here through the weekend and this morning. We are only at 21 minutes or so. Does anyone have any other questions? This is a great time to ask. We have a lot of time. We can really probably take a deep dive into anything that anyone wants to talk about. SaberSim, general strategy. One thing I meant to note here, and I just skipped over it by jumping right into the first question here. This is live for a reason. We want clarifying questions. We want follow up. We want a little back and forth. So I saw K9 Bronco said, thank you, very helpful. Yeah, absolutely. If there's any follow-up questions to any of these things, just shoot them out. And it's also a daily show for a reason. So this is not a pick show. This isn't a tout show, but we want to use the slates that we have going on in different sports tonight as examples. So, questions like that, 2-game NBA slate. Let's talk a little bit about strategy or possible strategy or ways to think about the slate. Those questions are definitely encouraged too. So let's see. We just got one here in Slack. Go ahead and copy this over. All right, this question. Any advice on how to handle teams with low implied SS team totals that are being generated as the top stack? Yeah, let's take a look. Let's switch back to baseball here. Yeah, so let's take a look at this. On a night like tonight, especially, I think you are probably going to see a lot of that because we have, of the 12 teams playing ball tonight, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Half of them are projected under 4 runs on SaberSim right now. None of them are projected over 5 runs. But there's a few different ways to think about this. And this is a great question. We've talked a little bit about this before. But let's just say we were taking our first stab at the slate tonight. Let me edit some projections here so we don't see a message. And let's start with some default settings and build a 20 max. We always like to start with our test build and see what we're getting, because I bet we are going to get some stacks like that. So give this a second to run here. Okay, so let's just kind of see what we are getting out of here. So we are getting a lot of Cardinals, Twins, Brewers, Mets. These are teams that are probably Cardinals 3.8, Twins 4.2, Brewers 3.8, Mets 3.4, right? So it's not a great hitting night, but we are, oh, that's the wrong build. Let's go back. We are getting a lot of those stacks that have a little bit of a low implied total. So there are a few things to think about here. One thing I think as a good signal always to look at is to see how is SaberSim thinking about these team totals in relation to Vegas. So on a night like this, we are getting some we are getting some low implied run total stacks. To me, what that implies is that because of our ownership fade is going to be a little bit higher already right out of the box. These teams with higher implied run totals, SaberSim is going to be thinking that they're relatively too owned relative to the field. So one thing I might be looking at as the slate goes on is as the day goes on, see how we are looking in relation to Vegas and see if we are feeling that we have some edge here. I know the White Sox are a team that I've seen on some books already early this morning here that are a little bit higher. So I think that we are probably, let me see what the actual sports betting tool looks like too. I think we are probably in general a little bit low on the White Sox today. So we have a couple points on the under here. But one thing to look at, for example, would be, say you checked Vegas odds as we're getting close, and the White Sox are actually a little bit closer to like 5.5 runs. And we've got them at 4.9. We're really low on them. You are very much going to be pushed in the direction of taking some of these stabs on lower owned stacks because we are going to feel that the White Sox are over owned compared to their actual simulated data. So one way to deal with that, for example, would be to bump up the White Sox or something like this, a little bit more of a chalkier stack. Maybe you split the difference like we were talking about last week. You don't jump all the way up to whatever their implied total is. And some of those, let's see, you allow some of those projections to come up. Yep, so you can see White Sox are now bumped up a little bit. I'm not sure why this message is still showing up here. And if we ran another build here, we are likely to get a little bit more White Sox stacks. Another option in terms of just thinking about how you're handling that or what you're looking at is to just kind of see what those lineups are looking like. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at some of these. So we had a ton of the Cardinals who have a low total. So let's go look at some of our Cardinal stacks. So let's see here. So we've got a few Cardinal stacks, right? Where we've got a 4-3, a 5-2, 5-3. Right now, it looks like the way we're thinking that ownership is going to end up is that we're going to have a few highly owned pitchers at the top. And it looks like these lineups are built by taking a couple of those, or at least one of those highly owned pitchers, and pairing them with a relatively lower owned stack. So maybe you're just okay with this in this case, right? We've got a super low owned stack. We've got the chalkiest pitcher on the slate. This lineup is probably pretty well leveraged. It's got a big stack. It's well correlated. Maybe some of these lineups are just okay. We're just happy with that. Another way to look at it, and we talked about this last week as well, is that we're in general okay with taking some stabs at these lower run total teams, but we don't want to be this exposed amongst 20 lineups to some of these players. So maybe we start chopping down some of these exposures here. And we're just going to spread out our batting ownership or our batting exposures to a more even distribution of hitters. And what we'll see here is this is probably going to push us. So we start seeing some of those White Sox stacks. We start seeing some of, let's see, San Diego. Again, it's just not a very good hitting spot tonight, so I don't think there's going to be a really chalky team. I think one of those teams might be the White Sox. But we do see a White Sox stack then now pop up in here. It still has the 3 Cardinal stack on the back side of it just to get some of that total ownership down. So yeah, there's really kind of a handful of different ways to look at this. I would say what I would not do is ignore that signal completely. Typically, when you run that test build, when you see something that you are surprised by, it is a very good idea to take a minute to stop, to maybe check some of your prior biases you had about what might happen on the slate against what then you are seeing based on what SaberSim wants you to do. So we'll reset our exposures here. If we had arrived right at this slate, I think, or right at this build, I think what I might do is go see how does SaberSim at this point compare to Vegas, and maybe if we are significantly under on certain teams that are going to be some of the best hitting spots of the night, maybe bump a few of those teams up in the projection. So we talked about that. I would say to look at the lineups overall and see what the constructions look like, right? So our constructions with teams, we only looked at the Cardinals, but we could even take out a Mets stack, right? The constructions, what do the constructions look like of certain teams that have low run totals, and try to think about what is this lineup really attempting to accomplish. And especially too, another thing to look at is the ownership of the pitcher on the other side of the stack, right? So we do have a few Met stacks here. I don't know what we have. Do we have Gomber here? Okay, so we don't have Gomber in our pool. Right now we have him at 12.8 projected points, or 12.8 projected ownership. He is the most popular of the cheaper options, and I would not be surprised if that continues to rise throughout the day. I think Gomber is likely to be one of the more heavily owned cheap pitchers just up against the Mets. So in this case, we're also leveraged against the cheapest, excuse me, not the cheapest pitcher, but the most projected owned of the cheap pitchers. So these aren't necessarily bad lineups. I would say try to understand maybe what signals we're seeing from the lineups. And then finally, limit your risk to teams that are projected to only score a handful of runs. So we did it with the batting exposures. Another way of doing this would be to just say, I like the idea of playing some Cardinals bats. I don't want to ignore what SaberSim is giving me, but I'm only going to play 30%. Twins have a low implied run total too, but that team can really hit. Maybe we're a little more willing to be a little higher exposed there. And we start doing something like this, spread out some of our risk this way. So a few things I would keep an eye on there. Is it possible to add a projected team ownership to the team stacks tab? It would help figure out leverage. This is something that we've heard before too. Definitely something that I can see how it would be a useful feature. Something maybe we can look at adding in the future. We don't have any plan for that right now, especially looking ahead to some of the features we want to deliver before football. One thing I can just recommend is if we come over here, you can start to get a pretty good idea of what the chalky teams are going to be just by looking at individual player stacks. I know this is not ideal, but you can kind of see, the chalky batters are going to be a part of lineups built with chalky stacks, right? So I think right now, at least what we're thinking is it's going to be all about the White Sox and the Indians tonight for the chalkier stack. So that is probably the easiest way to see that at the moment. Cool. Let's see. Another question came in through Slack here. What is the difference between rank and unique in filling entries? That is a great question. Let's go ahead and jump back over here. So you can see when we were looking at this earlier, we had unique for all of our fill methods. What this is basically going to do is it is going to pick out a single unique lineup from the build and assign it to every single entry that's tagged as unique here. So for my single entry and 3 max lineups, I built a single build of 7 lineups. And this is actually how I in baseball go about filling my lineups. So we have the single entry here, 3 max, another single entry, single entry, single entry. These are all set to the same build, this 7 GPP build, and they are all set unique. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Every single one of these contests or every single one of these entries is going to get a unique lineup in it. Rank is instead going to start for every lineup and fill the best Saber score lineup into the first entry, the second best Saber score lineup into the second entry, the third best Saber score lineup into the third entry, and so on. So a good example here to see that will be these bigger contests, right? So we have the quarter jukebox 20 entries and the four seamers 10 entries, right? So I did the same thing initially. I built 30 GPP lineups. So what this is doing is it's taking all 30, it's set to unique, it's splitting a random set of 20 to this contest and a random set of 10 to this contest. But if we set this over to rank, what it is going to actually instead do is this contest is going to get the top 10, and this contest is going to get the top 20, including those top 10 that are in this contest. So you'll get some duplication there. And it basically ends up being, do you want to double or triple down on your best Saber score lineups and enter them in multiple different places? Or do you want to spread out your risk and have a unique entry in every lineup, right? So another way of thinking about this particular contest mix, I guess, right? I've essentially built 37 unique lineups and, well, probably 37 unique lineups, and I'm spread them out and I have unique set here. And when I enter this in, I'm going to get a unique set of lineups in every contest. Another way of thinking about this contest mix would be to actually just build 20 and set these all to rank. So let's actually do that. So we'll build 20 here. Oh, let me move this around here. Oh, hopefully you guys could hear me here. It looked like my mic had gotten a little quiet. Okay, so we've got a fresh build of 20 lineups here. Wrapping up in just a second. All right. So if we wanted to instead fill these contests based on just using a ranked method, I'm going to go ahead and fill with rank. So every single entry contest that just has one entry in it is going to get that top lineup. So we're going to have that duplicated one. Well, it's going to be actually every contest is going to get that lineup once, right? So it's going to be used once here. The first entry in the quarter jukebox is going to be used here. The first 3 entry max is going to be used here, and so on for all of these, and once here. And then it's going to use the second entry, the second Saber score lineup. So the quarter jukebox is going to get its second lineup. The hot corner is going to get its second lineup. These have all been filled now. And the four seamer is going to get its second lineup. And then it's going to get the third best lineup. So you are basically going to be getting more of the lineups at the top of your build with the top Saber score here. So coming back here to this build we just did, the 20 lineups in this case, this top lineup here at the top is going to be used probably seven different times. Hang on, this is going kind of slow. Okay, yeah, so this lineup here at the top is going to be used at once in every single contest. And this lineup is going to be used in the 3 entry max and as the second lineup in both of the 20 entry maxes. And this lineup is going to be used is the third lineup in the 3 entry max and then in every 20 max. And then all these other lineups will be only used in those 20 max lineups. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions there. Does unique fill randomly? Yes, it does. That's another thing that's kind of we've heard from users before and is on our list here of giving more control over where unique filled lineups go. Like, for example, right, I've got 20 entries here in the quarter jukebox. That's only $5, but I've got $40 worth of entries into four-seamer. So if I was potentially uniquely filling these, I might want, like, if we're going back to what I would actually do here, you might want a little more control here over which ones actually end up in the four-seamer, where maybe it's something like still fill unique. We don't want to duplicate it all, but give me the 10 best Saber score ones in this lineup and then the next 20 best Saber score ones in this lineup. So we're talking about some ways to continue to improve the entry editor. For right now, it is just a random fill when it's done with unique. All right, cool. Any other questions? YouTube chat has been quiet today. Anyone on YouTube watching live that have any questions? I guess everyone's watching on YouTube, right? Most of the questions have just come through office hours, so that doesn't really matter too much. Kind of a goofy question, but any other questions from anyone? All right. Cool. Well, here's what we will do. We are at 40 minutes in here, 20 minutes left on time. Been a little bit more of a quiet day on questions here. Thank you for everyone that chimed in. I will go ahead and cut us off here. I will be around through the end of the hour in the office hours channel. If anything comes up, feel free to shoot a Slack message. Happy to address it there. If there are any other questions outside of the next 15 minutes or so like that, feel free to pop the question in and we'll make sure to get to it in tomorrow's show. I'll have this video up and timestamped and posted on YouTube publicly for those that want to watch it back later or catch up later. So we'll get that up this afternoon and we will be back here again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. The only other news I guess we have is that we are planning on doing our first strategy session deep dive in this time slot on Thursday. Hoping to have a sports betting focused strategy session. So I know there's been a lot of questions about how to improve your sports betting game, how to use our sports betting tool. So that is going to be our plan there for Thursday. So tune into that. We'll also have the recording to that posted, obviously. Just let me know if there are any other questions I can help with here, and I will see you all again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again.